Welcome to Fans First, a sports podcast where your voice matters most. Hosted by Hall of Fame sportscaster Jim Powell. This is the show that puts fans at the heart of the conversation. Whether you're cheering in the stands, screaming at the TV, or debating with friends about the latest trades, Fans First is here to amplify your thoughts, your insights, and your love for the game.
Hello and welcome to Fans First, a sports podcast. My name is Jim Powell. I'm honored to be your host again today. And I'm also honored with the guest that we have coming in here. His name is Wayne Larrivee. And of course, he's known to all NFL fans and all sports fans, period. One of the great voices of any sport, of any broadcaster that we have in our country. So Wayne, as voice of the Packers these days, which you've done now for many years, as soon as I hear your voice, I feel like I'm in Lambeau right there next to you. How great is it to be the voice of the Packers?
Oh, it's been wonderful, Jim. I've been in the NFL. It's been great, actually, to be in the NFL for as long as I have, some 46 years or so. My first 7 years in Kansas City, 14 in Chicago with the Bears, and then the last 26, going on 26 now with the Packers. So what a way to spend a Sunday afternoon in the fall.
No doubt. Do you still take grief from Bears fans or Packer fans about, the fact that you've been at the helm of both?
Yeah, I take grief from some Chicago fans, but I always tell them that, you're really dating yourself if you remember me as the voice of the Bears. It's been a long time.
Well, you're coming off a great game last night. It was my favorite game of the entire week. I couldn't wait to watch the Texans and the Packers duel at Lambeau, and it lived up to its billing. It was a really good game. What are your thoughts right now on the Green Bay Packers? I'm still amazed at how Jordan Love has come back so quickly from that knee problem, and the way he has played has just been incredible.
Well, Jim, the Packers are like a lot of teams at this stage of the season. They're evolving. In the NFL, the way things are structured today with free agency and everything else, for example, the 85 Bears, my first year in Chicago, they were the best team in the NFL from the start of training camp at Platteville to the end of January when they blew out the Patriots in Super Bowl 20. They were the best from start to finish. In that era, a lot of teams were. Why? Well, because you didn't have player movement the way we have today. And, you had more opportunities, and they were trained differently in training camp. There was more hitting. There were longer training camps, two-a-day practices, all kinds of stuff that was done then and that is no longer done today. So consequently, what you have is a situation where teams, I think, come into a season, no matter who they are, and they evolve. They've usually lost 25 to 33% of their roster through natural attrition, free agency, or whatever. They have new faces, all this stuff. They're trying to put it all together. They have limited amounts of time now that they can work in the offseason as a team, limited exposure in training camp, and then most of them don't play at all in preseason. And so you start the season and you really don't know what you've got for about 5 weeks. And now we're in that stage where we're finding out what these teams have.
Wayne, is it just my imagination, or has, generally speaking, the NFL been evolving more into a running league this year than we're used to seeing?
Yeah, it seems like it, Jim. I mean, good teams can run the football, and I think it's always been a component of the NFL. But, in recent years, with the rules changes, it became much more efficient to move the ball through the air, it seemed like. And again, just the way the game is officiated today, the rules changes that were made, they favor the passing game. You can't touch the quarterback the way you used to before. There are a lot of things that go into it. But I always think at the basis, a team that gets to the Super Bowl can usually run the football and stop the run. They're the two most basic components of NFL football, and it's been that way since the 20s.
What is the weakness of the Green Bay Packers? Is there an apparent weakness that the evolution of the season will take care of, you think?
Well, I would have a week ago said maybe the run defense, that type of thing, maybe the defense in general. That's always been the question mark here since about 2010. But I really think they took a step in the right direction in the last couple of weeks. They've handled teams that have had multiple threats, both on the ground and through the air. They've done a great job in that regard. It looks to me like this defense, under their new defense coordinator, Jeff Hafley, is evolving in the right direction. They've had trouble putting consistent pressure on the quarterback. They really pressured well against Houston and Green Bay on Sunday. And so I think they're getting better as this season goes along. But I agree with you in the premise you made a moment ago in that the running game, teams are more effective running the football for a couple of reasons. And I think one of them is that, in this day and age, in your front seven even, you need lighter, faster players to cover really the 3 receiver sets and the 4 receiver sets and that type of thing. Consequently, what you end up with is a lighter box, so to speak, and that makes you more vulnerable to the run. So teams are running the football effectively, but the passing game is still the big factor. And I think the Packers are making strides in both areas. They gave up some yards on the ground against the Texans, but they shut them down completely in the air.
You mentioned rule changes that the NFL, it seems like all the major sports, they like to tinker. They're never satisfied with what they've got. They've got to try and do something else to make either them look really smart or improve the game is obviously what they're hoping to do. This dynamic kickoff thing, I mean, I feel like that has been just a big pile of nothing since the regular season even started. Am I wrong?
Yeah, well, for the most part, Jim, like everything else, it's evolving as we speak. A week ago, 40% of kickoffs were returned. As now they're starting to figure out, okay, maybe we can make a play on these guys. We force a return and kick the ball down to the 3-yard line. Maybe our coverage guys who are already downfield can make a play shy of the 30-yard line, which would be the goal. And then it's worth kicking to a team. Other teams have kicked it away through the end zone. They don't want to deal with the dangerous return man of whatever, that kind of thing. The Packers have seen a lot of that with Keyshawn Nixon. But, it's funny. The reason the rule is in there is because there were 11 kickoffs in the Super Bowl a year ago, and none of them were returned. Only 22% of kickoffs were returned in the 2023 season. This year, that percentage, as going into last week, was up around 33% or thereabouts. And the week before, the 40% of kickoffs were returned. So I think what we're trying to see here, what's happening is that if you can get somebody to return a kickoff, you put a lot of air under the ball, get almost like a punt, make them field it in the landing zone, which is between the goal line and the 20-yard line. Land it there, force a return, cover it, and maybe you don't give up yardage out to the 30-yard line. But, again, it's still evolving, and I think it's going to be something that evolves. We saw something yesterday, Jim. This was amazing. There was a 15-yard penalty post-play on the Packers on the extra point, okay? So what happened was, instead of kicking it from the 35, they moved the kickoff spot to the 50-yard line, 15-yard penalty. Then Kaimi Fairburn, the kicker for Houston, intentionally kicks the ball out of bounds. So you're saying, okay, well, the Packers are now, that's a violation. The Packers are going to get the ball at their 40. Well, no, because they reinforced that penalty again, and instead of getting it at the 40, they got it back, at the 25-yard line, which is like double jeopardy, isn't it? Am I crazy here? They're going to have to figure that out.
Yeah, that's sometimes they make these plans about these rule changes in the off season, and sometimes they just make them up on the field. It feels like on occasion. I just felt like when they named it the dynamic kickoff, I raised my expectations, and I have not really seen a lot of excitement coming out of it so far. Let's go through the races right now where we stand. We're nearly the halfway point. The Packers obviously have been doing really well. They're a really good football team. I love the balance that the Packers have, and I feel like they've got a great chance to be one of those teams that evolves into a serious playoff threat. 5-2, 3-0 at home, plus 43 in point differential for the Green Bay Packers. A lot of positive signs for the Pack.
Yeah, there are. They're in a tough division, the best division in football thus far, and I think it will play out to be that way through the season. You've got 4 really good teams. You've got Detroit. Jim is, in my opinion, the best team in the NFC, and they went to Minnesota Sunday, knocked off the Vikings. Tight ball game, should have been a tight ball game. Vikings are playing very well. They were playing so well when they came to Green Bay. They got up on the Packers 28-0 in Green Bay earlier this year. They were playing so well. I said to myself, they've really got to worry about that. And you say, well, why? Well, if you're playing this well in September or October, there's no way you're going to be playing that way in January when you really want to be playing that way. And it goes back to the conversation we had before. Teams evolve in the NFL. The Super Bowl champion isn't super in October. The Super Bowl champion's super in January and February. But if you're that good early on, like the Vikings getting out of the gate, boy, they've got a lot of work to do because there's a lot of ball game left. And I think Detroit right now, and again, they lose Hutchinson, their pass rusher. There's liable to be a deal to be made somehow to get a pass rusher into Detroit. But at any rate, right now, their quarterback is playing off the charts well, and that's a really good football team.
Well, and the team that we were thinking might be, a little softer in the NFC North would be the Chicago Bears. And then I've watched Caleb Williams go out the last couple of games and look like he's been a quarterback in the NFL for 15 years.
Yeah, you know what, Jim and I watched them early in the year, and he was kind of struggling a little bit. They got a lot of good pieces around him. They put an awful lot into that team around that first-round draft choice in terms of wide receivers, running back. They've invested in the offensive line. Their defense is very good. It's one of the better defenses overall in the league. So it was only going to be a matter of time if they took care of this quarterback, if they didn't panic when he struggled early in the season, that he would come around. He's got the ability. He's got all the ability in the world. But as you know, having observed the NFL ruins more quarterbacks than it ever makes, about 2-1. So, go ask the Wilsons and Darnolds and others who have struggled and have bounced from team to team. But this is a quarterback I think is the real deal, and probably going to be their best quarterback since Sid Luckman.
Elsewhere in the NFC, Washington Commanders, obviously they dodged a little bullet yesterday with Daniels, who got hurt, but it doesn't sound like the rib injury is going to be all that serious. But, just Wayne, speak to the influx of these rookie quarterbacks that have come in out of that draft. I don't know what the expectations were in your mind, at the start of the regular season, but there's some really talented young quarterbacks that have just entered this league.
Yeah, Daniels and Williams, I felt had a chance to be real good early. And why, Jim? Well, the mistakes that NFL people make on quarterbacks is they don't allow them enough time in the college game. In other words, the two quarterbacks I'm worried about coming out, Drake May, who's now playing for New England out of necessity, basically, way too early. He never threw, I don't think he threw 1,000 passes. He threw like 700 passes in college. Same thing for J.J. McCarthy at Michigan. Little more concerned there too, but he's injured. He's out for this season. This will serve him well. He won't be able to go get into a bad situation. So he'll be able to observe and see how the pro game is played and how you prepare to be a pro quarterback. I thought Williams and Daniels are the two quarterbacks that had the most experience, well over 1,000, well over 1,300 passes thrown by each in the college game. And what this does is it allows the talent evaluators of the NFL to get a clearer picture of who these guys are and what they might do on the pro level. And I think that's why those two guys are going to succeed. The other guys I'm not sure of. It depends what happens as they go along and how they're handled. But I think those two quarterbacks we just talked about, Williams and Daniels, are outstanding. They're going to be very good quarterbacks in this league for a long time.
Now that we've seen almost half a regular season, when you look at the NFC East, Washington's a top 5-2, 3-0 at home. Philly in second, 4-2, 3-2 in the conference. Dallas 3-3 and 0-3 at home. That is not playing well, obviously, in the state of Texas. And then the Giants, their coach is already under fire. They're now 2-5, 0-4 at home. That's a surefire way to get fired, isn't it?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And the quarterback they invested in, Daniel Jones. That's why, on the other thing, Jim, we asked, well, are these quarterbacks going to be any good? It takes a couple of years. It really does. It takes a couple of years of starting to figure out if you have the right guy at quarterback. So, they paid Daniel Jones big money. It's not working out. None of us in the league can understand how the Giants allowed Saquon Barkley and Xavier McKinney to walk out of that facility in free agency. Nobody could understand that. That team was markedly less than it was before, and they weren't very good last year. But those two players leaving really hurt. As far as the Cowboys go, Jim, it's not that they're 0-3 at home. It's that they've been getting hammered at home. And I don't know how Dallas is, handling that.
Yeah, their fan base is not too happy, and Jerry Jones doesn't always help himself when he decides to make public comments, and that has happened again this year. In the West, it's surprising to me to see that Seattle currently is first in the West at 4-3. They're 2-2 at home. Then come the Niners at 3-4, only 1-3 inside the NFC conference. Arizona is 2-4, and the Rams are 2-4, 0-3 on the road with a bad point differential. So that looks like one of the weakest divisions. I still am thinking that the 49ers will pull it all back together when it's all said and done and make a run at the end, but off to a slow start.
Yeah, very slow start. San Francisco has been decimated by injuries, Jim, and it depends if they get those players back and how soon they get them back as to whether they'll make a rebound. But they're well coached. And the other thing about San Francisco, and I always worry about this, they lost the Super Bowl. That's traumatic, okay, for a football team, and it has impact the following. You don't get over that in 1 year, just go right back to the Super Bowl. Oh, and it used to happen on a semi-regular basis back in the early 70s, okay? Now, what happened last year to San Francisco, not only did they lose the Super Bowl, but they had the lead. They were in control of that game, and they allowed that game to get to overtime, and then Patrick Mahomes Magic won another Super Bowl. That traumatic experience, I think, has impact on this entire San Francisco season. I don't know if they would admit that, but my observation is I've seen teams really struggle after losing the Super Bowl to come back and try to make another run like that. It's just really difficult.
Well, Wayne, the Exhibit A for what you're talking about with the trauma that happens when you don't win a Super Bowl that you think you're going to win, check out the Atlanta Falcons. It took them years to rebound.
The Packers played them in the NFC Championship that year. That was 2016. And you're exactly right. I mean, they're up 28-3 in the second half of that ball game. Somehow lost it. And, Dan Quinn, I believe, was their coach at the time. He's an outstanding coach. He's now leading Washington. And, you're exactly right, Jim. They never recovered from that. And they're still trying to recover from that. So the trauma of it's one thing to get to the Super Bowl, but the trauma of losing a Super Bowl can shake a foundation of an organization.
Looking at the AFC, Wayne, Buffalo atop the East, 5-2, 3-0 at home, off to a very good start. Miami, with the injuries that they've had, they're suffering accordingly, 2-4, outscored by 60 points so far in the first half of the season. The Jets, we can go into the Jets for hours and discuss what's going on with that group. But 2-5, 1-2 at home. They start changing coaches. Did Aaron Rodgers have something to do with that or not? It's controversy inside and outside of their building.
I thought the Jets situation, their big question mark going in, I felt, was the offensive line. They had addressed it. It's a better line than they had last year, but it's still not a real quality offensive line. And I think Aaron Rodgers, operating the way he does and likes to operate from the pocket, he doesn't get out on the flank as much anymore as he used to, especially coming off the Achilles injury. I think that has a major impact on what they can do in the passing game. I'm a little surprised the running game isn't better. But, the Jets have been a dumpster fire for a long time. But that offense, they have a very good defense. But, Jim, football is a complementary game. And if your offense is not helping your defense a little bit, eventually that defense will wear down. We saw that on Sunday night in the Pittsburgh game.
Speaking of Pittsburgh, they're the leaders in the North, despite going with Justin Fields for a while. Russell Wilson really played well this weekend as he finally got a shot to start after the long calf injury that he had to nurse. But is that a surprise to you? It is for me to see the Steelers atop that division right now.
Yeah, a little bit when you thought Cincinnati and some of the other teams in that division. But, I think the Steelers are one of those organizations. They're just every year they're going to be involved somehow, some way. They're just so solid. Yeah, they've move from one quarterback to the other. Normally that would be a disaster for most organizations. Not the Steelers. They just we're just kind of seeing if Russell Wilson still has enough to get us to a Super Bowl. And, but I'll tell you, Baltimore is a team that is going to be really, must be reckoned with in the AFC.
They've won 4 in a row now. Their secondary can be picked on a little bit, but they have very few weaknesses. Lamar Jackson looks like he's headed for another MVP run. Yeah, the Bengals 3-4, 0-3 at home, and then you've got the little sisters of the poor, the Cleveland Browns. They've lost 5 in a row, and they're now 0-3 at home. Did you see that when Deshaun Watson got hurt over the weekend, that the Browns fans that was the loudest they'd cheered all season?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of sad when you think about it. It just really is. That whole situation with the quarterback and the guaranteed money, wow. I mean, it shows you why pro football is held. I know baseball and basketball, they're guaranteed contracts. In football, the only money you're really guaranteed in your contract is your bonus money, unless it's otherwise stipulated, and very seldom is it otherwise stipulated. But that Deshaun Watson contract was just a disaster from the word go.
Houston 5-2 now, 3-0 at home. They're leading the South. Indianapolis 4-3, 3-1 at home, despite the fact that Anthony Richardson has either not been able to play at all, or when he did play, he hasn't played well at all. Jacksonville 2-5, 0-4 on the road. Looks like Trevor Lawrence is starting to find his sea legs again. And then Tennessee 1-5, 0-3. It's going to be a grind for the Titans all season.
Yeah, we're going to see Jacksonville this week down in Jacksonville. They've been in London for 2 weeks. I believe they played 2 games consecutively over there. It's hard to figure that team because, Doug Peterson, who was the backup quarterback for many years in Green Bay with Brett Favre, he's a quality coach, led the Eagles to a Super Bowl victory. But Trevor Lawrence has been a little up and down, and I'm not quite sure what to make of them in general. In that division, we've seen the Colts, and they have a good team. The Colts have a good team, and I think they may, in the end, outlast everyone. The Titans are a team in transition, and they're just getting a new coaching staff and everything else. So it's more of a year of transition for them.
Out west, Kansas City 6-0. I mean, they look like the front runners that we all expected them to be, and they are not disappointing so far, are they?
Yeah, and they're not playing that well. Everybody's saying that their defense is keeping them in it. Their defense has been outstanding. Their defense is the reason they won that Super Bowl. I mean, outside their defense got them to overtime in that Super Bowl, and then Mahomes won it, against San Francisco last year. But their defense has been one of the best in the league over the last 2+ seasons. So I really have a lot of respect for that. The Eagles were in the same position a year ago. Remember when they were winning games and everyone was saying, well, they don't look good, and they get to 10-1 and then the bottom fell out. I don't think that will happen with Kansas City. Number one, they're better coached. Number two, their defense is really outstanding, and that will not go away. Defense travels, and I think Mahomes and company on offense will get it together as they go along. But that defense is helping them to win games now. And Mahomes is making just enough plays to win. They know how to win games, and they're going to be there in the end.
You've got the Chargers, you've got the Broncos, you've got the Raiders in that division. I don't see anybody really threatening Kansas City, though. That should be a pretty easy slate for them.
The Chargers are better than people think, and Jim Harbaugh is a great coach, especially on the NFL level. He was great in college, but he's even better on the NFL level. He turned San Francisco into an instant contender, and I think he's starting to do the same thing with the Chargers. They may not have as many tools to work with as when Jim got to San Francisco a number of years ago, but nonetheless, quality coach. They're building it the right way, strong in the offensive line, physical football team, and they've got one of those guys at quarterback.
Another team that is participating in that, what looks like an evolution toward running the football more here in the current season, because the Chargers like to, Jim Harbaugh, he wants to run the ball and he wants to play defense, and he's very good at coaching both.
Yeah, he really is. It'll be interesting to see that team. And the other team that is intriguing out there, we spent some time with them this summer, the Denver Broncos and Bo Nix. I think this quarterback, the best drafted quarterback to coaching staff matchup coming out of the draft last year was this one. Nix, Deshaun Payton, and what they like to do offensively. It's going to take some time, and he's had some ups and downs, Bo Nix, but nonetheless, I think he fits perfectly what Sean Payton wants to do, and I think eventually they're going to be very good.
Well, and there's a great example right there of a guy that played a lot of college football. So he came to the NFL much more prepared than some of these other young quarterbacks.
And NFL personnel people have a better feel and handle on what this quarterback can project to on the pro level. It's a lot harder with a Drake May or a J.J. McCarthy.
Talking with Wayne Larrivee, the voice of the Green Bay Packers, former voice of the Chicago Bears, and a voice that you never forget once you hear it. We're going to flip the switch right now. That's a little feature we do in our program. We want to take our guest in another direction. And Wayne, I want to go back to your roots, back to the beginning. What made you want to be a sports broadcaster? How did you get started? I know people ask me that all the time. I want to be a sportscaster too. How do I do that? What's your advice to young people that are interested?
Well, first off, there's no direct route to doing it. I mean, everybody's journey is different in one way or another. And I was a kid growing up in the late 60s, early 70s, and I followed the New York teams. The Yankees were my favorite team. And then the New York Knicks, when I was in high school, they were winning championships. They won 2 out of 3 years or 2 out of 4 years. And their announcer was a guy by the name of Marv Albert.
Sure.
And he was on radio at the time. And I thought he was one of the best radio announcers I've ever heard. And it was just, so it was him. I followed him a lot and tried to learn off of him. And he was my favorite announcer at the time. And the Yankees broadcasts were really kind of interesting. You had Frank Messer, who was a professional announcer. You had Bill White, who was a great analyst and went on to become the president of the National League, I believe it was. And then you had Phil Rizzuto, who was just, he was the guy you listened to because he would say anything. And it was fun. Those guys were wonderful to watch and listen to. And the Yankees from about 64 through 76 or thereabouts weren't very good in my formative years, but they were my team, and those were my announcers that we watched every weekend.
Well, back in the 70s when I was growing up, I bought Marv Albert's book called Yes, and it was a great read that definitely inspired me. And then at the end of his book, he had something that I never saw anywhere else, at least in that era, where he had a list of colleges that he would suggest that young broadcasters should go to Syracuse or, University of North Carolina. There's some schools that are much better at developing broadcasters and have that as part of their curriculum. And I basically followed his lead. I started. It helped me focus on my grades more because he was saying basically you need to go to a good college and they'll polish you up as a broadcaster, and then we'll see what happens from there. So that was I've always been indebted to Marv Albert for his early advice, even though he doesn't know he gave it to me.
Yeah, it's interesting because I decided I was going to go thinking about Syracuse, and I decided to go to a college where I could get on the air as a freshman and find out, number one, if I could do this, and number two, if I liked doing it. And so I went to Emerson College in Boston and had a great experience there. And, they've done a great job of developing broadcasters and that type of thing over the years. But it was a smaller college. And so my nephew, for example, went to Syracuse and studied in the journalism broadcast end of it. But I think it depends on the individual and where you want to go. I felt I needed to get hands-on experience, and that worked for me. So like I said, there's so many different ways of going about it. And the other thing, Jim, is the business itself. I'm not sure what to tell kids today because my thought was, and I'm an East Coast guy, I said, well, I'm going to go up to the Midwest to kind of work my way up. So I went to Pampa, Texas. I did Friday Night Lights. I went to, Iowa. I happened to be able to do Iowa Hawkeyes football when I came out of college. And why was I able to do that? Well, back in those days, there wasn't one network that did your college football. Wisconsin had 3 different originations of its broadcasts. Iowa had 13. It was amazing. And to be able to do one of those and then, that kind of qualified me for the Kansas City job, and one thing led to another. But today you don't have some of those opportunities. There are a lot of opportunities out there, but they're different from my time.
Well, I basically did the same thing that you did in a different area. I did go to University of Georgia, and I went and applied for and got hired by the student radio station my first day on campus. And I was on that radio station for years trying to, I always tell young broadcasters, it's kind of like being a pilot. You have to spend a certain amount of time on the air in the case of broadcasting, where you can work out, your kinks and get and smooth yourself out and gain some confidence. And that's exactly what the student radio station did, led to a commercial job in Athens as well. And that was my training, really. That was more in the end, it was more helpful than the school itself.
Oh, absolutely. And but I always say this to students too. School is what you make of it. Okay. There are bigger name universities, Missouri, Syracuse, some others out there. But your experience and what you get out of school is basically up to you. The curriculum can only do so much for you.
Wayne, it has been an absolute joy to have you on with us. We're honored to have you. You do a great job, and you're extremely loved by many, many football fans, whether they're rooting for the Packers or the Bears or anybody else, because of the great job that you do. And I really appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Jimmy, it's great catching up with you, and all the best in what you're up to.
Thank you so much, Wayne. Well, it's time now for one of my favorite parts of our Fans First podcast, and that is Get Off My Lawn.
Hey, get off my lawn.
We have a video submission today from Jeffrey in Fernandina Beach, Florida.
How can pop culture allow men to beat up on women in sports? We are in a time where an average at best male athlete that cannot reach the top of male sports sees a path to recognition and glory through the use of estrogen. They can't dominate as men, so they transition to female, utilizing all the advantages of the performance-enhancing drug testosterone that's been surging through their body for years. And that gives them an advantage, and they go on to dominate real females. In what warped reality is that remotely fair? Where are the protests from the same feminists that fought for Title IX? Do they not have cis daughters who want to level a playing field? Do they not care that scholarships that could go to their daughters may very well soon go to trans women? It's time for real women to take a stand and stop this. This is a threat to equal opportunity for women in sports. It's time for women in athletics to quit worrying about being canceled and quit worrying about advocates criticizing them and come out against this. If they don't, there may not be a future for them in women's athletics.
Well, you can absolutely ring the bell for that one. You are spot on, Jeffrey from Fernandina Beach. We're going to have a guest coming up soon on our podcast who knows a lot about this topic. Riley Gaines has become a national figure discussing this whole controversy about men and women's sports. And Riley will be a guest on our podcast very soon. So if you've got a question for her that you'd like me to send her way, or a comment that you'd like for her to throw around and entertain, feel free to write to me at jim@fansfirstpodcast.com. Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of Fans First, a sports podcast. Don't forget to follow me on X, Instagram, and Facebook, and please subscribe to our Fans First YouTube channel. If you like our Fans First content, you can help us by making sure you are subscribed to all of our social networks. Don't forget about our Fans First website, fansfirstpodcast.com, to be included as a guest on an episode. We ask that you please send your voice memo, your video file, or your written memo. Please keep your submissions to no more than 45 seconds in length. We want you to be part of our show. We're so glad you joined us for today's episode, and we'll look forward to seeing you again very soon here on Fans First, a sports podcast.
Stay tuned, stay passionate, and keep celebrating the sport you love. Visit us at fansfirstpodcast.com to explore more. Sign up for our newsletter to receive exclusive updates, and follow the podcast on social media to join our growing community of sports enthusiasts. Your voice matters to us, so don't hesitate to share your thoughts and connect with fellow fans. See you next time.